Alrighty, so another full slate of MLS action in week number 10. 12 games, 1 game on Friday, 10 on Saturday, and 1 on Sunday. Now, I will admit, not gonna lie, I'll probably won't watch most of these games because this week I got some crazy kind of ground hopping to do where I am gonna be going 4 games in 3 days, and most likely I'm gonna miss a lot of these games. Although one thing I will know for sure is at least I will get to watch one of the 12 games that's going to be happening this weekend, and that, of course, is the Quakes versus FC Cincinnati, and I'm going to that game, and as I will talk about a little bit later in this video, this is really the first time I expect the Quakes to really win at home. But having said that, let's actually begin with this week action, and we start off on Friday between the Colorado Rapids versus the Vancouver Whitecaps. Game that is between two of the bottom feeders in the Western Conference. Colorado sitting dead last in the Western Conference and dead last overall in the MLS standing, while Vancouver are second to dead last. Colorado still have not registered a win this season. They're the only team to not register a win so far this season, while Vancouver drew 1-1 to Philly at home in the last game. In the last 5 games by Colorado, boy, it has been very ugly. They lost all 5 of their last 5 games. They lost to Chicago 4-1, then they lost to DC at home 3-2, then they lose to Orlando City 4-3, then they lose to Houston 4-1, and then they lose to Dallas 2-1. And doing those 4 games that during the last 4 games, they have conceded more than 3 goals. They conceded 3 goals here, 4 goals here, 4 goals here, and 4 goals here. They have conceded a total of 15 goals in just the last 4 games. Yeah, it is clear that Colorado is having a huge issue in terms of defending. Whereas for Vancouver, it's kind of the opposite with them. Vancouver, they drew 1-1 against Philly. They lost to Orlando City 1-0 in heartbreaking fashion, but then they did beat LAFC and become the only team so far this season to beat LAFC 1-0 at home. They drew to Chicago 1-1, and then they lost to the Galaxy 2-0 at home. And whereas Colorado is having problem in terms of defending, Vancouver is having problem in terms of goal scoring. And, what's interesting about this game will definitely be the fact that this is the first game where Colorado, of course, will not have Anthony Hudson managing since 2017. He, of course, got fired this week, mostly because of what he said in the last game, of the fact that this group is not good enough and that feels like a bottom group and that there is a huge gap between his team and the rest of the league in terms of the talent-wise. And we'll see how Colin Casey, of course, do with this team. Usually when ever a coach got fired and then an interim head coach comes in, usually that does inject a little bit of life into the players, because it's clear that the players weren't playing under Anthony Hudson, and that it feels like, especially after what Hudson said in the last game about the players not being good enough and that he just pretty much just throw the entire team off the bus, you would think that Colorado would be very motivated in this game and prove to their former manager that they are not a bottom group. But they will face against a Vancouver side that is very good in terms of defending. Like, defending has not been a problem for Vancouver. Vancouver has definitely got much better in terms of defending the defensive end, but it's the attacking and the goal scoring that has been a problem. Actually, more of the goal scoring of the problem. The attacking, they definitely have been good. They have created some chances, but they just could not put away those chances. They're not being clinical enough. So, yeah, it'll be very interesting to see in terms of this battle between the bottom feeder of the Western Conference. But that being said, let's head to Saturday's action, and we start off with the Red Bulls taking on the Galaxy. The Red Bulls are 2-2-4, while the Galaxy are 7-1-1, and they're currently tied with their hated crosstown rival LAFC with the league in the Western Conference. The Red Bulls, of course, won 1-0, not 1-1. I got that one wrong, but they won 1-0 against FC Cincinnati at home in the last game. A much-needed 1-0 victory after they were really struggling for a long spell of time. While the Galaxy, of course, they have won 6 out of their last 7 games. They're actually on a 7-game unbeaten streak. The only game that they did not win was against Minnesota last midweek. For the Red Bulls, the last 5 games, as I mentioned, they beat FC Cincinnati 1-0. Then they took an embarrassing loss to New England 1-0 on the road. They drew to Sporting KC 2-2. They lost to Minnesota 2-1, and they lost to Chicago 1-0. As for the Galaxy, they beat RSL 2-1 in last week action, while they drew 0-0 to Minnesota. They won against Houston 2-1. They won against Philly 2-0. And they won against Vancouver 2-0 on the road. And, I have a feeling, for me, something tells me that there could be an upset in this game. And usually me saying the Red Bulls getting a win and me saying that they're getting a win is an upset is just show you how crazy this season has been. Like, you would think the Red Bulls are right now in the top of the league, and the fact that I called this an upset against the Galaxy and you thought they were at the top of the league, that just doesn't make sense. But here we are. The Red Bulls are near the bottom of the Eastern Conference. They desperately need a win, and hopefully they can carry this momentum that they had against FC Cincinnati into this game against the Galaxy. And, the Galaxy, I wouldn't say that, this team, they definitely have been very decent this season, but there's been time where they've been riding their luck a couple of times. And in these last couple of games, especially the last game against RSL, they look good in the first half, but the second half, man, it was really bad. And the only reason why they got a win is because Zlatan, of course, bailed them out. And there's been multiple times this season that Zlatan has single-handedly bailed out this team. And I have a feeling, something tells me, teams are going to really just double or even triple team the Galaxy right now because of the fact that they know Zlatan is going to be their main goal scorer, and as long as if you shut down Zlatan, then the Galaxy is going to have some trouble. That's what Minnesota did in that 0-0 draw against the Galaxy, where they shut down Zlatan, and the Galaxy just couldn't do anything to basically score a goal. So for the Red Bulls, they need to definitely do that, and I think that they definitely have good enough defensive and to stop the Galaxy. The real question for the Red Bulls is where in the world does the goal come? Like Vancouver, the Red Bulls is one of those teams that struggle to score goals, and you wouldn't think that they would be struggling to score goals when they have BWP, who, this is probably the worst start of his MLS career for BWP so far. I mean, I've never seen him struggle this much, and the fact that I think he's only got 1 goal so far this season. That's how much of a struggle he has gone through so far this season. But next up, it's the Texas Derby between Dallas and Houston. So Dallas, of course, won 3-2 in the last Texas Derby, and that Derby was actually the first time in 5 matches that there was a winner in the Texas Derby, because prior to that match, there's been 5 draws in a row between both of this team. For Houston, in terms of their last 5 games, Houston, they won 2-0 against Columbus. They lost to Galaxy 2-1. They won 2-1 against the Quakes. Then they won 4-1 on the road against Colorado. They won 3-2 against Vancouver. While for FC Dallas, they drew 0-0 to my Quakes team in the last game. They won 2-1 against Atlanta. Then they beat Portland 2-1 at home. Then they lose to Philly 2-1 in an absolute collapse in that game. And also they didn't actually lose this one. They actually won 4-2 against RSL. Just ignore the red mark. The red mark is usually me showing that they lost the game, but they actually did beat RSL in that game. And yeah, this is a very interesting Texas Derby because both of these teams are very, very decent. And, for Houston, this is a good opportunity for them to show the league that, yeah, they are for real. And that there's been a lot of discussion of the fact that the reason why the Dynamo hasn't been rated as one of the best team in the league and a team that you would think that they can be competing in the playoffs is because they have an ultra soft schedule. Like, they play some of the easiest teams so far in the beginning of this season, but hey, they take care of their business against the easiest team, and when you do that, you of course are going to get a good record. But having said that, now they are getting into the tough stretch, and their tough stretch actually started against the Galaxy, which they lost, but as I mentioned before, they played pretty well in that game and probably should have deserved a draw. And then they beat Columbus, which I thought Columbus was a very decent team a couple of weeks ago, but then Columbus, ever since the last couple of weeks, kind of collapsed. This will really be the first test for Houston against their hated rival and against a Dallas team that looked to try to bounce back after being very toothless in that game against the Quakes at home. So, yeah, it will be a very interesting Texas derby. Hopefully this game does not end in a draw because there's been a lot of draws in the Texas derby recently. But next up, Orlando City. So their record is dead even at 3, which kind of sums up their season because you just don't know what kind of Orlando City team that you are going to witness. You're going to either see a good Orlando City team or a bad Orlando City team or an Orlando City team that were like last season where they were leaking goals without reply. Well, they play against TFC, who has definitely cooled off a little bit. They have a record of 4-1-2. Orlando, of course, drew 1-1 to the Draw Kings of MLS that is known as NYCFC away, while TFC suffered an embarrassing 2-1 loss against Portland, although I don't know, should I call it embarrassing, because Portland have started to show some stride lately, but still, losing at home against a team that is near the bottom of the MLS standing is definitely not a good feeling to have. For Orlando City, of course, as I mentioned, they drew 1-1 to NYCFC. Then they beat Vancouver in the last minute 1-0. Then they lost to RSL on the road 2-1. But then they won a crazy game against Colorado 4-3 before losing to DC United 1-2. I mean, their form has just also summarized how inconsistent and just how unpredictable of what Orlando City has been this season. Well, for TFC, of course, they lost 2-1 against Portland. They won 4-3 against Minnesota, and then they lost 3-2 against TFC. And I actually didn't finish the rest there. I just realized I didn't actually finish the last two game that TFC had. So I'm just going to quickly cheat a little bit and just go online here to look at the last remaining couple of games that TFC had. And I know for a fact that they probably have, before this loss against Seattle, they won pretty much most of the game, because I know that they were undefeated heading into that one. Oh no, actually they drew against Chicago 2-2, and then they won against NYCFC 4-0. But still, they were in a very good form before that loss. And, for TFC, as I mentioned, they have definitely cooled down a little bit, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that they are started to kind of go back to CCL form, where they were just leaking goals left and right. Although in the last game, it was just their attack didn't show up. And I'm not quite sure if Josie Altidore is going to be back for this game, because it seemed like with TFC without Altidore, this team just does not function whatsoever. And if Altidore is not in this game, then that is another huge blow for TFC, and this could be a long day for TFC. But having said that, with Orlando City, it's so unpredictable what kind of Orlando team will show up. I mean, they could be a world beater in this game, or they can just be like what they were last season, where they just completely folded themselves and just lose in an embarrassing fashion. So, although, if you're an Orlando City fan, I'm guessing you will take inconsistency over just complete incompetence. But having said that, Orlando City fans are definitely fearing the fact that, yeah, June is about to come, and when June starts for Orlando City, that is when they just go on a tailspin. So, yeah, hopefully that will not happen to them this season. I mean, if they can continue this form, even though they've been very inconsistent, I think they'll definitely make the playoffs. Consider how weak the East is this year and how the East just so unpredictable. I mean, you can be very inconsistent and you can still make the playoffs. I mean, that's how bad the Eastern Conference has been this season. Speaking of the Eastern Conference, we're going to stick with the Eastern Conference as the next game, because Montreal, who has a record of 5-2-3, is taking on NYCFC, who has a record of 2-6-1. Montreal, of course, beat Chicago 1-0 at home, while NYCFC have drew for the 6th time in the last game against Orlando City at home, which hence that's why I said that they are the draw king of MLS, because they tend to draw a lot of games, and they have drawn the most game out of anybody right now in the league. And I don't think it's even close. I don't think anybody has drawn more than, well, Vancouver draw 3 game, Orlando City has draw 3 game. I'll probably have to look on the record for the next 6 games and the next 12 teams I'm going to put after I switch the board to see if they have more than 3 draw. But by far, NYCFC have draw the most. And that has to be frustrating for NYCFC fan because, most of those draws, you could say that they should have won in some of those draw. And I think probably for NYCFC, this in their game against NYCFC against Orlando City, I guess, they didn't really do much, so I guess they deserve a draw in this game. They, of course, won 1-0 against Chicago in an ugly game, and then they got their first win on the road against DC United. This one they should have won because if it wasn't for the Sean Johnson howler, it would have been a 3-2 game. And then this was also a frustrating game for them because they couldn't put the ball into the back of the net. Like, despite the fact that they had so many chances in this game against Montreal, they just could not solve the puzzle of Montreal. And, for Montreal, most likely they're not going to have Piatti again. Although, good news for a Montreal fan, I have heard that Piatti has returned to full training, but he did leave training early on Tuesday, which, usually when that happened, most likely he's not going to be available for the weekend. So, yeah, Montreal, they're going to try to bunker again against NYCFC. I mean, the last game between both of these teams, Montreal was just holding on for dear life, and NYCFC was just putting a shooting gallery in that game and was just absolutely dominating that game. Now, I don't know if Montreal is going to do it because they're at home, and you usually never see teams bunker at home, and especially Montreal are tied at top of the Eastern Conference with 3 other teams. I don't know if they're just going to straight down bunker against NYCFC and that they're trying to get a point or 3 points in the game. But that being said, for NYCFC, this is definitely another good opportunity for them to pick up 3 points. Recently they have definitely started to get a little bit better, although, the last week game and the last week draw against Orlando City will be a little bit of a setback with the way that they're trying to build up some momentum. And yeah, we'll see if they can do it against Montreal in this game. And finally, the final game on this board is between the Union and New England, who the Union are 5-2-3. They, of course, are tied with Montreal and also DC at the top of the Eastern Conference, while New England, they are nowhere near the top of the Eastern Conference. In fact, they're near the bottom of the Eastern Conference with a 2-2-6 record. Philly, of course, won 2-0 against FC Cincinnati in the midweek game, while New England drew 4-4 against Kansas City in that crazy game last week against SKC. The Union in the last 5 games, they won 2-0 against FC Cincinnati. They drew 1-1 to Vancouver. Then they won 3-0 against Montreal. They did lose to the Galaxy 2-0, but they also beat FC Dallas 2-1 in that incredible comeback in that game. While for New England, they drew 4-4 against SKC. They lose to Montreal 3-0, but then they won 1-0 against the Red Bulls before losing to Atlanta 2-0, and they lost to Columbus 1-0. And this one is a pretty easy one. I think Philly is probably going to win this one, despite the fact that Philly has a short rest in this game compared to New England that didn't play a midweek. Philly, in their midweek game, was at home. This game is also at home. So basically, they didn't even have to travel at all. They're basically just staying home, and usually when you have a team that, they might have short rest, but they have 2 straight home games, it shouldn't be a big of a problem for them, although this is the 3rd game in 7 days for Philly, and their previous game, besides the FC Cincinnati one, they did have to travel all the way across the other side of the country to play there. But again, I think this is pretty obvious that Philly is going to win that. New England, although they put up a good showing against SKC, it seemed like whenever New England puts up a good showing against a good team, in the next game, they basically just drop an egg. And I have a feeling that it's going to be happening in this game too. But having said that, crazy things have happened in MLS. Maybe New England could pull off a stunning upset and beat the Union in this game, but I just don't see that happen. I think the Union should be able to get all 3 points against against New England. I mean, if they can get all 3 points against FC Cincinnati, who is another team near the bottom of the Eastern Conference, I would assume they'll probably get all 3 points against another team that is near the bottom of the Eastern Conference, that is the New England Revolution. But that being said, let us switch the boards and look at the other 6 games that's going to be happening this weekend. Alrighty. Next up, DC. They take on Columbus. So DC currently have a record of 5-2-3. They're currently tied with Montreal and Philly in the top spot in the Eastern Conference, while Columbus are kind of heading into a little bit of a tailspin with a record of 4-1-5. And both of these teams just played each other 10 days ago, with DC winning 1-0 on the road against Columbus. I believe it was Wayne Rooney scoring the free kick that was the decider, and that this was also a midweek games about 10 days ago. DC, of course, did lose the last game against Minnesota away 1-0, while Columbus have lost 4 in a row coming into this game. Last 5 games, DC, they lost 1-0 to Minnesota, as I mentioned. Then they won 1-0 against Columbus, as I also mentioned. They did lose to NYCFC at home 2-0. They won on the road against Colorado 3-2. And then they drew against NYCFC. Technically, it should be on the road because they already played here. But yeah, they drew 0-0 to NYCFC then. Well, for Columbus, they lost 2-0 to Houston, then they lost 1-0 to DC, then they lost 3-1 against Portland, then they lost 1-0 to Montreal before winning 1-0 against New England, as that was the last time they were able to taste victory. And yeah, for Columbus, just like I said for some of these teams that are just struggling to score goals, yeah, they're part of that category. This team just cannot buy a goal right now. They've only scored 2 goals in the last 5 games. And I guess, when you look at earlier in the season when Columbus wasn't really scoring a lot of goals, but they score enough goals to be able to win games, I always say that when teams try to do that, it's a good thing that you have a very good defensive structure and that you, of course, are scoring enough goals to keep yourself afloat, and that's what's been the philosophy for Columbus for the last couple of years. But there is going to be times where the goals are not going to be there and that the well kind of just run dry for them, and right now that is where Columbus is right now. The goal well has clearly run dry with this team. There's just no attacking threat whatsoever with this team, and it doesn't matter how good this defense is, even though this is actually one of the best defense in the league. If you cannot score goals, then you are not going to win games. Now, DC, this is they're kind of entering this game in a little bit of an interesting situation because, they were very frustrated with that 1-0 loss against Minnesota, especially what happened in the first half when they had a goal disallowed that they think that it probably shouldn't have been disallowed, and the fact that DC has been really bad in these last couple of games at Audi Field. Who would have thought that with last season of how good they were at Audi Field, who would have thought this season that they would actually do better on the road than they would be at home? I mean, I thought it would be the complete opposite, but here they are. They actually have a worse home record than they have on the road. But having said that, they have a chance to get a win against a struggling Columbus side. Although DC, like Columbus, they are starting to also struggle in terms of goal scoring, and that Lucharu and Wayne Rooney connection, it seemed like it has really fallen off a little bit, and that besides that, they just don't really have any other goals scored on their team. So something tells me this could be a very low scoring game, and I will not be surprised if this game ends 0-0 between both of these teams that struggle to score goals. But next up, Minnesota. They take on Seattle, and actually, I accidentally put the same record for Minnesota as the same record of DC United. This is what happened when you decided to do the preview about 10:30 in the evening, and you want to get this done as quick as possible. And technically, I'm actually not that off in terms of Minnesota record. I wrote 5-2-3, and their record is actually 4-2-3. So if Minnesota was in the Eastern Conference, they would be actually right up there near the top of the Eastern Conference, but because they're in the Western Conference, I believe they're still above the red line, but they're currently in 6th place right now in the Western Conference. But they will be playing against the Seattle Sounders, who has been kind of dropped off a little bit, just like TFC, where their record is now 5-3-1. And I should say it's a very bruising kind of Seattle team, where in the last game they took a pretty big beating from LAFC, and that they had suffered a lot of injury right now. Now the good news is Christian Rodon, as I mentioned in the news of the week, his red card has been rescinded, so he would be available in this game. So at least, with Rodon in the attack and with Ladero in the attack, this team should be enough in terms of going forward. But it's the defense that I am kind of a little bit concerned with this team, because Leerdam, he will not be available for this game because, of course, he got a red card in the last one. But Minnesota, of course, in the last game, they won 1-0 against DC. They finally get a chance to sing Wonderwall for the first time at Allianz Field, while Seattle, as I mentioned, they took a bruising 1-1 draw against LAFC at home, where they finished the game with 9 men. Well, for Minnesota, they won 1-0 against DC United. Then they drew 0-0 to the Galaxy. They lost 4-3 against Minnesota. Then drew 3-3 in the first ever game at Allianz Field before winning 2-1 against the Red Bulls. As for Seattle, they drew 1-1 against LAFC. Then they drew 2-2 in the midweek game against the Quakes. They lost 4-1 against LAFC on the road. They did win 3-2 against TFC, and they won 1-0 against RSL. And did I also mention the fact that this is also should be called as the Ozzy Alonso Derby, because this is probably the biggest headline in this game, with Ozzy Alonso playing against his former team. And he even said this week that he is trying really hard to not hide his emotion, because Ozzy Alonso is basically Mr. Sounders. I mean, he's been with the Sounders ever since the Sounders came into the league back in 2009. And the fact that, it was obviously tough for not only him but for Sounders fan to see him go, and decided to not retire as a Sounders player, which I hope someday maybe Seattle would think about getting Ozzy Alonso back and maybe have one last year of a hurrah before retire him, because he's really Mr. Sounders for this Seattle team. But yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how he's going to do against his former team. And like I said, there's going to be definitely a lot of emotion that is going on with him facing against his former team. And it will be also very interesting to see if he does score against Seattle, what is his reaction. I know Ozzy Alonso doesn't score a lot of goals, but if he does score against Seattle, yeah, that would be a very interesting thing. I'm assuming he probably won't celebrate, because whenever you score against your former club, there is an unwritten rule where you're not supposed to celebrate. But because of how Ozzy Alonso is so attached to the Seattle team, I don't think he would even he would score the goal and he basically just walk away. Like, he doesn't even hold his hand. He just basically held his head down, knowing that he scored goals for his team, but he scored against the team that he's been playing throughout pretty much his whole career, and basically made himself a legend with that team. So it will be very interesting to see whether or not that's going to happen. But otherwise, for Minnesota, this is a very tough task. Seattle, despite the fact that they're badly bruised from what happened last week, they are desperate to try to get back to the winning column, and they will try to do that against a Minnesota team that has definitely looked more steady in terms of the defensive end. I mean, before, their defense was absolutely a joke, but in the last 2 games, back-to-back shutout, and they're gonna hopefully they can follow that with this game against Seattle, although it's gonna be very tough to try to stop this Sounders attack. But next up, talking about the Sounders, their Cascadia rival Portland will be playing against RSL. So Portland, started to figure things out on the road as they won back-to-back road game, including winning 2-1 against TFC. Their record now it's improved to 2-1-5. While RSL lost 2-1 to the Galaxy away, their record now falls to 3-1-5. In the last 5 games, RSL lost to the Galaxy 2-1. Then they won 3-0 against FC Cincinnati on the road. Then they won 2-1 against Orlando City at home. They lost to Seattle 1-0. Then they lose to Dallas 4-2 at home. Well, for Portland, they won 2-1 against TFC. They won 3-1 against Columbus before they lost 2-1 to Dallas, 3-0 to the Quakes, and 2-1 against the Galaxy. And, you know, this Portland team, it has definitely been rejuvenated in these last couple of weeks, and let's see if they can keep it going against RSL. And Portland, last season, they really took RSL apart. Like, they doing those 2 games that Portland and RSL faced, Portland outscored RSL 7-1. So, you know, let's see if Portland can continue their good form and what they did last year by outplaying RSL. And, you know, RSL, they're kind of a strange team to figure out, and they're kind of one of those teams that you know that they can definitely hang with teams. But it's just that even when they're trying to hang with teams and trying to, you know, maybe get a result by hanging around with those teams, they just couldn't quite do it at the end of the game. So it'll be interesting to see how this one will go. But like I said, Portland has a very good record against RSL, especially what happened last year. And it will be interesting to see if they can continue to get their 3rd row win this season. Like, if they get a row win here, I'm going to say that Portland will definitely make the playoffs, because I think they should have enough road win now that when they head into that back stretch where they're going to get tons of home games, that's when they are definitely going to get hot. But make sure that they also sign a striker during this summer, or just literally now. Like, they've been rumored with a Liga MX striker for so long, but yet they still have not made any signing whatsoever. But next up, and I'm actually going to turn the lights off because this thing kind of blocks a little bit, is my Quakes team. So they play against FC Cincinnati, and don't let the record fool you. The fact that, you know, this is a game between 2 teams that is in the bottom of the table. Well, both of these teams are near the bottom of the table, but one team is absolutely rejuvenated, and one team seems to head to a downward spiral. And that team that is rejuvenated is the Quakes, who their record is 2-2-5. While FC Cincinnati, their record is 2-2-6. The Quakes drew 0-0 to FC Dallas, and that's after they drew 2-2 against Seattle and then absolutely destroyed SKC 4-1 the previous week. They got 5 points in those 3 games in 7 days, and that they have just looked like a respectable MLS team for the last month. Well, for FC Cincinnati, yeah, they have kind of lost that respect of being a good MLS team, as they have lost 5 of the last 6 games and scored 1 goal during this period. The last 5 games for the Quakes, they drew 0-0 to FC Dallas, and the last 5 game really just shows you how this Quakes team had rejuvenated. As I mentioned, they drew 0-0 to Dallas away, drew 2-2 to Seattle away in a game that we should have won if we didn't blow a 2-0 lead. Then we beat Sporting KC 4-1 at home. We did lose to Houston 2-1, but we did look decent in that game, and at least didn't look like we were going to get absolutely destroyed. And then against Portland, as I wrote Houston here, we won 3-0 in that game. So we have a 2-2-1 record in our last 5 games. While for FC Cincinnati, they lost to Philly 2-0. They lost to the Red Bulls 1-0. They lost to RSL 3-0. They lost to LAFC 2-0. And what does all those losses have in common? They didn't score a single goal. In fact, the last goal that they scored was off of a penalty against SKC, and that was all the way in the beginning of the game. So they have gone over 400 minutes now without scoring a goal. And when you look at this game, all things point that the Quakes should be able to win this game. FC Cincinnati is on a death spiral right now. They cannot score a goal. Alan Koch is basically kind of doing his best Anthony Hudson impression by kind of lashing out the players and said that they're not good enough. Although, to be fair, Koch kind of said it in a more kind of less severe way as what Hudson would say about how his team is kind of like a bomb group kind of player. And as I mentioned, FC Cincinnati, they cannot score goals. They only score one in the last 6 games, and they haven't scored a goal from open play since that New England game a month and a half ago. And then I mentioned the fact that FC Cincinnati did play a road game against Philly where they lost 2-0 in the midweek, and now they have to travel all the way across the other side of the country on a short rest to play against a Quakes team that has been rejuvenating. I mean, there is no reason, of all this factor, there is no reason the Quakes should be getting anything but 3 points in this game. But, having said that, I've seen before where the Quakes, with all the factors that points out that they get a win, at the end of the 90 minutes, they don't get a win. And although this is probably the most confident, I will say the Quakes will get all 3 points, and I think that this is a game that they got to win. Like, if they don't get anything but 3 points in this game, and this is something I haven't said in a long time as a Quakes fan, anything but 3 points in this game is an absolute disappointment. Hopefully, I'm hoping that they will get 3 points. I'm 90% sure that the Quakes will get all 3 points against FC Cincinnati. But like I said, I've seen it before where everything goes points that the Quakes will get a win, they get a draw, and MLS is a crazy league. So we'll see how this one will go. But next up, LAFC. They play against the Chicago Fire. LAFC, their record is 7-2-1, while Chicago are 2-3-4. LAFC, of course, drew 1-1 against Seattle, but they would be very disappointed because they were up 2 men in that game and up a man for majority of the game, and they had so many chances to score a goal to basically put that game away. While Chicago, of course, lost 1-0 to Montreal. For LAFC, their last 5 games, as I mentioned, they drew to LAFC 1-1. Then they beat they beat Seattle they drew 1-1 to Seattle, and they beat Seattle in the previous week 4-1 at home. They did lose to Vancouver 1-0, as that's the only loss that they suffered this season. They beat FC Cincinnati 2-0, and then they beat DC United 4-0 away. As for Chicago, they lost to Montreal 1-0. They lost to NYCFC 1-0. They won 4-1 against Colorado, drew 2-2 against Chicago, or 2-2 against TFC, and they won 1-0 against the Red Bulls. And, I think LAFC should be able to win this, knowing the fact that they've been so good at home, and especially when they play a weak team, they always tend to really put the throat to the sore. For Chicago, I think these last couple of games, as much as how inconsistent they have, these last couple of games have clearly showed that now it's not the defense that's been an issue. It's the attack. And it's shocking the fact that the attack is a problem. Consider how much talent that they have right now on the attack. I mean, when you have guys like Nemanja Nikolic, Alexander Katai, Mihailovic, Gaitan, Bastian Schweinsteiger, Dax McCarty, all of those players in that attack, there is no way in the world you should be going back-to-back games with no goal scoring in these 2 games. And in these last 2 games, their attack was just like in the beginning of the season. Even when they're not scoring, their attack was still doing very well and create chances. The only reason why they couldn't score is because they couldn't put those chances away. But in the last 2 games, it's just simply their attack just doesn't show up. And I hope they showed up in this game, because if they don't, they're going to be in for a long night, and LAFC is going to be like a wild animal in this game, that they really want 3 points and that they want to brush off last week's disappointment against the Sounders away. But lastly is the Sunday game, and it's between Sporting KC versus Atlanta, or should I say the wounded Sporting KC, or should I also say Swope Park, Kansas City, because it seemed like Sporting KC most likely will not be starting a lot of their regular starters, and that they're going to put most of the Swope Park Ranger player in this game, mainly because they basically have nobody in that starting 11. Like, that starting 11 has been just completely obliterated by injuries in these last couple of weeks. Well, they of course play against Atlanta team that, they did win 1-0 in the last game against Colorado, but it was a very unconvincing win. And I guess in this game, for both of these teams, like in the beginning of the season, when we look at this match, we highlight this match as a very kind of marquee kind of matchup. And in some way, it is still a very marquee matchup, but not because both teams are very good. Because both teams are desperate to try to get all 3 points. And I don't know exactly who would be more desperate to get all 3 points in this game. I guess both teams would be, because for Sporting KC, it's going to be like as bad as the fact that they have pretty much nobody else in that starting 11 that is fit enough to start games. They need to start string some wins so that, through this tough time, they can later recover later in the season when they do get most of their squad back. Well, for Atlanta, yeah, I mean, I don't really need to say why Atlanta really needs to win, because the standards that their fans sets and the standard that Atlanta should be, the way that Atlanta has gone for this season, they have dropped way below the standards that we know of Atlanta United, and they are definitely desperate to try to prove that they're still they should still show the standard of MLS, and that they want to, at the end of the year, they want to be like that playoff team. But as of now, they definitely are not playing like a playoff team right now, and it will be very interesting to see what does Frank de Boer do in this game too. Does he once again lash out the fact that Sporting KC is going to park the bus, which I don't think Sporting KC is going to park the bus. Peter Vermees, he's not a guy that likes to park the bus, so at least Frank de Boer will not lash out the fact that Sporting KC is just going to completely park the bus in this game. But in the last 5 games, Sporting KC drew 4-4 against New England. They lost 4-1 to the Quakes, drew 2-2 against the Red Bulls, drew 1-1 against FC Cincinnati, and then they won 7-1 against Montreal. But that was all the way back when they had that was the last time they actually have a squad that was completely healthy. Other than that, they have not put out that same strong starting 11 since that game. Well, for Atlanta, of course, they won 1-0 against Colorado. They lost 2-1 against FC Dallas at home. They did win 2-0 on the road against New England, but then they lost 2-0 to Columbus and drew 1-1 against Philly. So, yeah, both of these teams desperately need a win. Sporting KC, also, one thing that I want to quickly mention is that Sporting KC is actually wearing their old jersey and wearing their old Kansas City Wizard jersey, which I definitely need to get that jersey. I mean, that jersey looks very, very nice, but it's probably going to cost me a lot because, retro jersey usually costs a lot on the MLS market. But for Sporting KC, the other thing to note is that they haven't lost at home in a very long time, and in order for Atlanta to get 3 points, they need to also break that chance. But still, this will be a very interesting game to see, and that I expect both of these teams to try to go for a win. A draw, I don't think would really help anybody. I mean, if this game ends in a draw, it will be a very disappointing way for both of these teams, knowing that they need 3 points heading into this game. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it for all the preview of MLS Matchweek number 10 games. Let me know in the comments below what do you think of these games, which one that you are going to keep your eyes on, and also leave the prediction below in the comment section of all 12 of these games. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.